Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to SCAR 2020 online, and thank you for joining us online and finding ways to keep our important work going in Antarctica and sharing that progress despite the challenges of the global pandemic. My name's Gary Wilson, SCAR Vice President for Administration, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session on SCAR's future scientific research programs. Now, SCAR's scientific research programs are a very important element of SCAR's portfolio of research coordination and leadership. SCAR focuses its scientific efforts on high priority and time-sensitive research through its scientific research programs, or probably more commonly to you, SRPs. Those SRPs are time restricted, and once research programs are completed, which is generally on about an 8-year period, the delegates consider new topics and research programs that are being developed by the program planning groups. So in this session, we're going to learn about 3 new research program plans being developed for consideration by the delegates. We've got those 3 presentations. We'll have time for a question or 2 at the end of each presentation, and then an opportunity for more discussion after the presentations. So pop those questions into the live Q&A box on the SCAR online web link. So the first presentation we're going to hear about is Ant-CLIM, Integrated Science to Inform Antarctic and Southern Ocean Conservation. Now the co-leaders of Ant-CLIM are Alex Terrauds and Mercedes or Mecha Santos. Alex is a spatial ecologist at the Australian Antarctic Division in Hobart. He's Chief Officer of SCAR's Standing Committee on the Antarctic Treaty System, which is where SCAR puts its response to a wide range of issues of importance for the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meetings, or ATCM, and associated meetings. Mecha is a penguin ecologist at the Instituto Antártico Argentino in Buenos Aires. She's Argentina's delegate to SCAMLR and is involved in developing a marine protected area proposal for the Antarctic Peninsula. Mecha also sits on the Science Advisors Group for the Antarctic Wildlife Research Fund. With that, I will hand it over to the presenters. Thank you.
Welcome all. My name is Mercedes Santos, and together with Alex Terrauds, we are going to introduce the SCAR Scientific Research Program proposal named Integrated Science to Inform Antarctic and Southern Ocean Conservation, or Ant-CLIM. We are the chief officers, but we would like to highlight that this was a participative process where a wide community was involved, and we would like to thank the program planning group for their collective efforts over the last few years. While there is a strong biological focus, Ant-CLIM will integrate research from multiple disciplines and fields of studies to build on and complement existing SCAR activities. There will also be a focus on science that can improve environmental outcomes for Antarctica and the Southern Ocean and inform conservation and management across the region. Importantly, this scientific research program will address fundamental science questions, including those that have been identified in the SCAR Horizon Scan, and include a broad range of research. At recent SCAR conferences, dedicated symposia, sessions, and presentations on science that can inform decision-making and drive policy change, it has been shown that a significant portion of the community, in particular younger researchers, are interested in undertaking and collaborating on research that informs good conservation and management outcomes. In the Antarctic Treaty System, the advice of SCAR is widely recognized as independent and objective, and parties often rely on this advice to help in decision-making. A resolution was passed at the 2019 Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting to formally recognize and acknowledge the contribution of SCAR to this meeting. So our overarching objective to facilitate and coordinate high-quality science, to inform and help to directly answer fundamental science questions, including those identified by the SCAR Horizon Scan, as well as emerging questions identified by the science community and policymakers. The science will inform decision makers and drive policy responses and effective management of the Antarctic environment. This does not necessarily mean that all science undertaken under the auspices of this program will be policy drivers. There will be some key policy drivers, but just as importantly, there will be a place for pure science. And one of the components of this program will be to identify connections between this science and environmental management and conservation. Some of our key specific objectives include to increase awareness of contemporary and future environmental issues in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, to identify vulnerable species, ecosystems, and environments, and to quantify threats and inform the development of practical mitigation strategies. So, if we are interested in improving environmental outcomes for Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, there are some key end users that we need to target. These include the Antarctic Treaty Parties, members of the Committee on Environmental Protection, and members of the Committee of the Conservation for the Scientific Committee for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. Also, several international and national bodies. And we want to facilitate dynamic responses to emerging priority issues by improving iterative discussions between scientists and policymakers. And as the SCAR Standing Committee on the Antarctic Treaty System coordinates all SCAR advices to the Antarctic Treaty System, close links to SCATs will be a key aspect of these interactions. To achieve these objectives in the conformation of the planning group, we look for gender equity, a wide geographic representation, inclusion of early career researchers. We look for to be a transdisciplinary group, and our work progress is based on a broad consultation and iterative process. So far, we are experienced diverse and enthusiastic planning program group. We have a round one of consultation in mid-late 2018. We have a second round of intensive consultation in early 2019, including with policymakers from the CEP and CAMELA. Our first full draft was completed in late 2019. We have a final consultation with the group, and we have a final draft completed by the end of April 2020, and in May this year we submitted the proposal to SCAR Secretary.
Thank you, Metja. That was a fantastic introduction and a great summary of the key objectives of Ant-CLIM and where we've got to now. What I'd like to do is to talk a little bit more in detail about the research themes and the synthetic theme that make up the core parts of Ant-CLIM. The first is current states and future projections of systems, including ecosystems, species, and functions. The second is more in relation to human impacts, particularly around the sustainability of human impacts and the impacts or the mitigation of these impacts. The third is socio-ecological approaches to conservation. Importantly, the fourth one is more about science synthesis for decision making to inform policy making. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. With regard to current and future states, there are a number of key guiding questions, I suppose, under this theme that will help us to focus our research efforts and help us to prioritise the research that will be coordinated and facilitated under Ant-CLIM. These include identifying vulnerable species, ecosystems and environments, integrating inputs to forecast change and projecting impacts from multiple stresses. Metja and I asked the program planning group to provide us with some examples of their recent research that actually sort of showed, if you like, the type of research that we may want to develop and continue under Ant-CLIM. And I'll just stress that these are just a few examples of the many inputs that we received from our program planning group. But for example, there was a paper published a couple of years ago by Jasmine Lee and colleagues on how potential climate change could influence and change the amount of ice-free land in Antarctica, and what the implications for this were for the biodiversity. Just recently, Mark Hindell and colleagues published a paper identifying some hotspots of biodiversity in the Southern Ocean, and again, the implications that this might have for area protection in the region. Our South African colleagues have published work and continue to work on the dispersal of plants in the subantarctic and the implications of this for landscape ecology. And there's also been work on wildlife disease and how this can potentially influence species and ecosystems in the Antarctic Peninsula region. With regard to the second theme, there's a whole range of research that we can do around human impacts and the mitigation of potential human impacts in Antarctica. Importantly, we need to actually quantify, if you like, or identify the current and future extent of these human activities. We need to understand the risks associated with them. And particularly, I think one of the more challenging areas of this space is understanding the synergistic and cumulative impacts. Again, we asked our program planning group to provide some examples, and just a few of these are highlighted here. For example, some work by Kevin Hughes and colleagues with non-native species and human movements. Some work by Sergei Kakarika and colleagues on understanding human impacts with regard to emissions, and some work recently led by Hannah Warshaw and colleagues on understanding the biases and potential deficiencies in our current area protection regime with regard to the taxa that they protect. The socio-ecological approaches is a really fundamental part of the Ant-CLIM program. And really underpinning this is the fact, if you like, that humans interact with all Antarctic environments, and that these social dimensions are actually inseparable from the biological, the geological, and the physical components of Antarctica. And of course, there's increasing recognition that it's important to integrate this type of research with some of the more traditional research that goes on into conservation and management of Antarctic values. Also, with regard to the socio-ecological approaches, is the fact that effective Antarctic conservation requires a number of elements around this approach, and that includes understanding these interactions, as I've just mentioned, but it also includes understanding that the planning and management occurs in a complex geopolitical environment. It's also important to remember that some of the values listed under the environmental protocol need and require socio-ecological approaches, and these include intrinsic values and aesthetic values. Again, under this theme, we'll have some guiding questions, and these will be largely related to connectivity and social impacts of environmental change, responsible and ethical governance, and the role of resilience in the dynamics of socio-ecological systems. And there's more information on these that can be found in our proposal if you're interested. I think a key point that I'd like to reiterate here is that none of these are fixed in stone. I think we really are aspiring to be a flexible and adaptive program in terms of the research priorities that we target as a group. And I think we need to do so if we are to respond effectively to the needs, the changing needs, both of the environment and of policymakers in Antarctica. The science synthesis theme is a really key component, and integration of outputs will be a key part of this theme. Integration across a broad range of disciplines, as I've just discussed, will help us to provide inputs into systematic conservation planning, for example, species assessments and protections, identification of vulnerable ecosystems, and the management of human activities. And it will also allow us to look across a broad range of scientific outputs and try and prioritise. And again, this group will interact. The importance of this group interacting with SCATS can't be overstated here. Given that SCATS coordinates all the SCAR advice to the treaty, SCATS will actually help us to understand what those priorities are within the Antarctic Treaty System meetings and prioritise our research and our scientific outputs accordingly. Of course, it's going to be really important that we acknowledge the work that's already going on within a range of SCAR groups. It's been pointed out that there's a number of overlaps between some of the objectives of Ant-CLIM and some of the existing work that's already going on under a range of groups. Anticon's not seeking to reinvent the wheel here. We're not seeking to duplicate any of these efforts that are already underway, but we will seek to add value wherever we can. And I think if we look at a more detailed sort of a schematic of the interactions of Ant-ICON across these groups, we can see that there's real potential for Ant-ICON to collaborate and to bring information in from these groups in a collaborative way without trying to duplicate efforts and actually add value to them. And this only shows the interactions of Ant-ICON, not between other groups, of course, but it does show the broad range of inputs and potential collaborations that can occur between existing SCAR groups. And of course, the importance of, again, of the link with SCATS and the importance of that link with getting good research into the policy forums, and of course, the ultimate game of informing and improving Antarctic conservation and management. From an implementation point of view, workshops will be a key part of how we bring research together, and wherever possible, these will be multidisciplinary. They'll be focused on objectives, and we're going to try and bring together some of the other SRPs wherever possible. Capacity building and promoting diversity will also be a really important part of Ant-ICON's early stages and also as we move forward. I've already spoken about the importance of the engagement with key end users, including SCATS, but we'll try and also make sure we do targeted and regular reporting to disseminate what Ant-ICON's up to in the broader community. As I start to wrap up, I just want to again reiterate and thank the importance of the program, the Ant-ICON Program Planning Group. We could not have asked for a more enthusiastic, knowledgeable and passionate group, and over the last 2 years, it's been, Metra and I have really enjoyed coordinating the inputs from this group, and we couldn't, as I said, we couldn't have asked for a better group. So thank you again. And just finally, if people are interested in hearing more, if people are interested in joining the mailing list, please let either Metra or myself know, and we'll be happy to either provide you with more information or add you to the mailing list as necessary. But I think I'll leave it there, and Metra and I think we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Alex and Metra, for a really great presentation there and a good summary of where things are at with Ant-ICON and that program. Now, we had a number of questions coming in as you were talking, some of which were answered as we went along, but I'll pick up a couple of them now, and then we'll come back to the discussion forum at the end to investigate some of the others. There's one that has come in a few times and I think is good to pass on, and that's how can early career researchers get involved in Ant-ICON? Don't know which of you wants to answer that.
Is it okay if I jump in first, Metra, and then you can follow maybe? Thank you, Gary. Well, there's a number of ways that we really hope that we can get ECRs involved in Ant-ICON, and to be honest, it's a real focus. I'm very personally, I'm very motivated to ensure that capacity building is a really important component of Ant-ICON. And so, for starters, we're going to create and develop and build on some of our existing links with APEX and make sure that we engage with APEX regularly. But we're also going to have an early career researcher involved with each of the themes formally on the steering group. We're also looking to set up a scholarship whereby early career researchers that are interested in participating in some of the meetings that SCAR attends, for example, the CEP meetings and the CAMLR meetings. We're hoping to get a scholarship off the ground whereby we can actually support the travel and participation of ECRs in these sorts of meetings. And that's to actually help people, younger researchers, understand the sorts of processes that are involved in getting research into and informing decision making and policy making. So that's just a bit of a start. We've got some other ideas as well, but that's a few examples there. Metra, did you want to add anything?
Sorry, just a little noisy sometimes because of the street. No, I agree with you. I think that there are different activities, but mostly we like to have young researchers or early careers to be part of these meetings and experience what is to participate and how their science can inform into policy. So yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you, Alex and Mecha. And just to add that please, anyone who really wants to participate in any of these SCAR programs, follow the links and just ask the questions of those people developing them, because these are very much open to input and broadening the thinking in terms of whoever wants to help get involved and advance the work. There's another question that's come in here. We've got time for another question before we move to the next presentation. This is, so the question here is, Antarctica is a very dynamic environment. What are the plans to incorporate historical data to help define current status of different interactions? How will you work with seasonal issues and lack of data to define current statuses of different areas for Ant-CLIM? The question here asks specifically about with regards to the winter season, but it's a pretty big question, but it'd be great to hear some thoughts on that. Alex, do you want to?
Oh yeah, I'll go first. Thanks, Gary. Look, I think it's a great question, and it makes a very important point, because we will need to access historical data to understand. We can't really understand our baselines unless we know where we've been in many cases for some of these data, and some of these historical data are going to be integral to our understanding of where we're at now, and indeed to informing where we're heading in the future. And so I guess all I can say in response is just an enthusiastic yes to the fact that we will be needing to access historic data, and of course within that acknowledgement is a recognition that we do have data deficiencies, both spatially and temporally and seasonally, with regard to many of the parameters that we're interested in, particularly with regard to human impacts and current states of biodiversity in all sorts of different environments. And so these are challenges that Ant-CLIM will address head on. These are challenges, these sorts of uncertainties and biases go to the core of the sorts of research that Ant-CLIM will be hoping to undertake, to try and clarify and, where possible, tease out some of the some clarity despite these uncertainties and biases. And there's a whole range of techniques that people are developing to try and do this. And it's a big question, and I don't think it's worth me trying to get into too many more specifics, except to say that it's a very good point, and it's something that goes to the core of what Ant-CLIM is interested in. Thanks.
Thanks, Mecha. One last question, and I know there are more, but we'll just reserve these for the discussion forum at the end. And if we get to the discussion forum and your question is not being answered because it's dropped off the bottom of my screen because there are plenty of questions whizzing by, please resend it. So the last question, which I think is useful for people, someone asked how they can have access to the studies on exotic species. And I think that allows just a quick explanation to folks as to where some of the information is being published and presented and how they can access the findings.
Thanks, Gary. Yes, very quickly, we do have a program planning group website on the SCAR website for Ant-CLIM, and within that website there is a publications page. We could, despite the fact that we are only a program planning group at this stage and still a proposal, sort of acknowledging that, I'm quite happy to put, with the author's permission, some links to some of the work that I highlighted on the publication page of the program planning group, and that will help people to not only sort of be encouraged to go to the program planning group website, but also to sort of see any of the specific research that I mentioned and look into it in more detail.
That's great. Thank you, Alex and Mecha, and we'll have some more questions for you later. But now we're going to move on to the second presentation and the second new program proposal, which is INSTANT. That's Instabilities and Thresholds in Antarctica. the Antarctic contribution to climate change. Now, the co-leaders of Instant are Tim Naish and Florence Colleoni, and Tim is a Professor of Earth Sciences at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. He's a climate researcher who's led several of SCAR's significant international collaborations to investigate the response of Antarctica's ice sheet to past changes in global climate. He's a lead author of the IPCC, and he's led SCAR's, or co-led SCAR's past Antarctic ice sheet dynamic scientific research program. Florence is a paleoclimatologist and ice sheet modeler at the Istituto Nazionale di Oceanografia e di Geofisica Sperimentale in Trieste, Italy. Hopefully I did well with the presentation, Florence. You can correct me later if need. Florence uses ice sheet models and energy surface models to investigate the interactions between ice sheets, ocean and climate. And she's also interested in the interplay between the tropics and polar regions as climate is changing. Now, this presentation is one I think Tim's going to lead, and it'll be a live one. So I'll hand over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. I'll just set things up here. Can we all see that? Is that? There we go. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone can see my shared screen, and I'll kick into this. Okay, so, you know, Florence Colleoni and I, we're just quite pleased at this stage after a lot of work and really a lot of great community consultation to be able to share this with you. Sorry, I've just lost my, sorry, I'm just going to, so look, sorry about that. Could everyone see the screen and hear me? I just had a blank screen in front of me.
Yes, Tim, we could see you and hear you.
Okay, look, really sorry about that. Let's restart. Oh, okay, this time. Okay. You would think after all this practice with COVID and Zoom, I'd have this sorted out. So here we go, and apologies everybody for the slight delay in the start. I'm hoping the chair will still allow me 15 minutes. So as I was saying, Florence and I, you know, it's just great to be able to present to you the Instant program. We're very proud, I think, of what we've pulled together with your support and the community consultation. So here we are, the co-proponents. I think we're differentiated in a number of good ways, and it's been hard work, but it's been enjoyable working together to get to this stage where we have a proposal that we're pretty pleased with under review. Just the timeline, as you'll all know, began 2 years ago at the Davos meeting, and since then we've had a number of workshops, and there's been the generation of a number of drafts, and yeah, just some really positive, good input and consultation from the broader community, and we just really want to acknowledge that. Here are some of the vital statistics. Yeah, we're a diverse group, a large group. It will be a large program. It's also diverse in terms of its interdisciplinarity, mainly focused on the geosciences and the physical sciences, but bringing in some elements of the biological sciences and certainly social science and science communication. And I did want to just call out those people listed there who were pretty key to getting it across the line at the final stages. And particularly, I want to acknowledge Daniela Leggett's input to get a social science lens over this, which is going to be an important part of the program. So instant addresses, I guess, one of the highest priority issues facing climate change science, and that's the question of Antarctica's uncertain contribution to sea level change. It takes a coupled systems understanding approach where we're looking at the interactions between the ocean with the ice sheet, the atmosphere with the ice sheet, and the cryosphere with the ice sheet. It is a large umbrella program. It will include the aspects of a number of past CRPs, at least some of those capabilities, and it will rely very much on good linkages and coordination within the SCAR family, and particularly with other SCAR groups, as you'll see in a minute. It also requires strategic partners in this space, and an important one is the World Climate Research Program, which is also going through a phase of implementation of a new strategy. So this is a really great time. We're working together to ensure that as we address this critical question, we are complementing each other. The motivation, of course, is this lack of understanding, and so this was certainly the case in 2013, with the in terms of what Antarctica would do with warming and how it would contribute to sea level rise in the future. And we left it out. The dynamic contribution was left out of projections in 2013 in the IPCC report. But since then, there's been a lot of activity, and particularly in the ice sheet modelling group, who have got to grips with some of the key processes, instabilities that we think are now important. And I guess what we're seeing is that we have now a significantly higher plausible range of global mean sea levels when you include the Antarctic contribution. And this range and the uncertainty that comes with it reflects our ongoing limited understanding of the physics, the interactions, feedbacks, and the fact that individual studies only capture some of the uncertainty. So really the central part of the central focus of INSTANT is to better understand those poorly observed, poorly understood rate determining processes that affect the ultimate dynamics and mass balance of the ice sheet. And I'll expand on a few of those in a minute. So here's the plan. It's the one out of the proposal, and everything I'm presenting here will be online and more, because I can't cover everything. And also you can read the proposal, download that from the website. But really what's driven this is the recognition over the last 8 years that there's a common theme here that some of the previous SRPs have been focused on: PACE, Ant-CLIM 21, CIRSE, and ECO, together with ISMAS as well, an expert group. And there's just been this convergence of activity of trying to get a better handle on the Antarctic ice sheet contribution to sea level change. So we're really going to draw upon and realign some of that capability, and you can see how it could map in to themes 1, 2, and 3, which are focused on coupled interactions of certain elements of the system. So the atmosphere and the ice sheet, the ocean and the ice sheet, and importantly, the solid earth and the ice sheet. And then hopefully the new knowledge and understanding that comes from that feeds into a thematic synthetic theme, theme 4, which improves our projections and ultimately improves sea level projections. And we will be integrating all our knowledge, our sea level projections, into a probabilistic sea level projection framework, and that will look at futures that the IPCC are currently interested in, the RCPs, and the shared socio-economic pathways. essentially theme 4, and very importantly theme 4, ensures the science is co-produced with the stakeholders and end users. And it really is at the interface of science and policy, and will involve not only scientists, but social scientists, practitioners, planners, publics. And there's a very strong element of science communication in here. And although theme 4 looks like it follows 1, 2, and 3, it actually doesn't. They're co-produced, and it's critical that we engage early with stakeholders and understand what their needs are, and that the approach we are developing is fit for purpose. You can see that there are a number of questions there. In fact, there's 20 of them, and these were identified through the proposal consultation process, but also articulated in Horizon Scan and other strategies. And they get progressively more applied as you go from question 1 to question 20. And you'll have to read about those. They are actually on the PowerPoint I've uploaded. And these are, these are common themes and really important questions the entire global research community is really focused on, and they're themes where SCAR researchers are just so suited to contributing. On the sides, you can see how we will implement this program, both with external strategic partnerships, but also internally within SCAR. And, this complementarity, I think, will be achieved within SCAR through cross-memberships on steering committees, joint development of objectives and action plans. And we've talked about that with the new SRPs as well, how that might happen, and also with external partners, how we might be engaged also in what they're doing and their thinking. So Instant will provide scientific evidence to assess the effectiveness and risks associated with climate change mitigation pathways, making Paris, not making the Paris Agreement. This evidence will also be really important in guiding adaptation approaches required to avoid the worst impacts: coastal flooding, erosion, groundwater inundation, salination, habitat loss, and large-scale human migration. The impacts of Instant are also really relevant to the CEP, CAMLR, COMMAP, the Antarctic Treaty Partners, as they will have profound, the impacts of sea level rise will have profound implications for Antarctic stakeholder groups, particularly national programs, their operations, tourism and fisheries. Therefore, theme 4 really is focused at the applied end on climate services and the critical involvement of social science in that. We're using a pretty well-established approach that has worked well in Ant-CLIM 21 and in CIRCE and in a number of the SRPs, PACE as well. And it involves a model data integration process where we've got to improve the coverage and both the quality and the coverage of our observations, both recent, present, and paleo reconstructions. On the basis of that, we improve understanding of the key rate determining processes at a range of timescales and spatial scales. And then the integration comes with improving the models, improving the skill and development of the models, but also enabling validation of the models and ensuring the models are really starting to capture the key processes that reduce those uncertainties. And of course, through all of this is this co-production and interaction with a range of stakeholders. So here's an example close to my heart, which I won't dwell on, is how paleo contributes. And this was out of the PACE program, and it's a model data into comparison. And we asked the question, well, what actually happens when the world's 3 degrees warmer and carbon dioxide is 400 ppm, and what happens to the ice sheet? And it was a really nice example of how data and modeling go together. And we do this because the magnitude of the forcing of the climate system that we're expecting in the coming centuries, we just haven't seen for millions of years. And this can provide critical insight, but it's also integrated seamlessly with observations of the present and recent, and with understanding of the processes and feedback. So this slide just really acknowledges that observations, more and more observations are required of the Southern Ocean, the ice shelf cavities, the subglacial conditions, the ice surface, and a range of types of observations from geodetic, glaciological, geophysical, geological, oceanographic, atmospheric. and importantly, the need for a continent-wide observing infrastructure, and I'm sure this is the case for all the SRPs, that includes airborne and space-based observations, and we want to help facilitate more access to that sort of data. There are key processes that are really limiting our understanding at the moment, and they include grounding zone migration, the behaviour of marine-based ice sheets, the role of ice shelves and buttressing, this runaway marine ice sheet instability that can occur, and the more topical marine ice cliff instability, and also the need to be aware of this threshold behaviour of the ice sheet and really understand how that affects the ice sheet and commits us to long-term changes. And the idea is that 2 degrees may be near some sort of threshold for ice shelves. After they collapse, then ongoing warming causes irreversible retreat. And what are the key ice-ocean, ice-atmosphere interactions? And a question that's very relevant to both us and Ant-CLIM Now is, when will we see amplified surface warming? Has it already started? When will Antarctica look like Greenland? And what's the relative influence of these atmospheric versus ocean forcings? And something that has been done very well, and obviously been the goal of CIRSE, is the recognition of the importance of solid Earth interactions with the ice sheet, which cause globally very non-uniform sea level change and have major effects on the dynamics of the ice sheet right by the margin. And interestingly, most feedbacks are positive, so they accelerate or amplify the processes such as warming or ice sheet melting. But solid Earth interactions could put the handbrakes on by providing pinning points to stabilize ice sheets. So all of these are important to get included in the models and the representations and the reconstructions of the ice sheet. So the goal is improve the projections. This is some current projections. The ISMIP project within WCRP are delivering right now for the current IPCC report, and we will work very closely with ISMIP 7. ISMIP 6 still has lots of problems. There's a wide range of projections within the ensemble of the individual members. There's large uncertainties, and there's still lots of work to be done in this space. And if we can reduce those uncertainties, then we reduce the major uncertainty in sea level rise predictions. We'll work with Bob Kopp, who is doing the international best practice really in terms of probabilistic sea level projections. His framework has been used for the IPCC report. He will be on our steering committee, and he will allow us and enable us to engage well with that ice sheet projections, sea level projections, sea level rise and impacts community. So this is how it sort of plays out. On the left-hand side, I guess the science engine room, which is both within SCAR and outside of SCAR and through partnership and collaboration, that then feeds through the filter of the IPCC into science that is useful, usable and used at the policy science interface by various end users. And as we go down through this, the science value chain becomes more applied and requires lots of collaboration with boundary workers and different organizations. But I think, key. So look, I won't go through all these slides at the end here, but just to point out, we are likely to be a large program, and so we haven't got a detailed plan at the stage, and we will have a program establishment workshop where we will identify theme leaders, and the themes themselves could be as large as old SRPs, so they will need their own action plans and they will need their own leadership. But the idea, like Alex explained, is really to have some early career mentoring and early career leaders working with the theme leaders, and to have representation both from SCAR action groups and groups within SCAR and partners outside of SCAR on that steering committee, which will be fully developed at the program establishment workshop. I won't go into any detail about the outputs. They're all listed there, and there are a range, and stakeholder engagement throughout's key. Obviously, the science needs to be robust, and we are focused on the peer-reviewed scientific literature. with ultimately outputs and submissions that will be relevant to the Antarctic Treaty System, the IPCC, as we've already said, the environmental portal, the ACE program, these sorts of things. I won't go over the impacts, as I've already talked about the outcomes and impacts. A little bit on capacity building. This is huge and really important, as others have acknowledged, and tough because of the post-COVID environment. So we want to really encourage the next generation of Antarctic scientists to develop their networks, and this will be challenging in a post-COVID environment, to share knowledge. We want to facilitate that with funding and opportunities such as workshops and summer training schools and that sort of thing.
2 minutes, Tim.
Oh, good. And in terms of outreach and communication, we will be appointing a communications coordinator. Likewise, we'll be appointing a data coordinator, which I'll talk about in a minute. Well, at least will help support those appointments. There's obviously going to be a range of outreach that is listed here, and I won't go into, and it's a very important part, but I do want to identify the science communication. And this we want to do from a research point of view, from an academic point of view, really understand how we can improve our communication of these quite complex uncertainties and risks with the public and with end users. And we have a number of science communication experts involved in the group. Data management, won't dwell on this. There are lots of established repositories we will use. We will follow SCAR best practice policies, and we really want to ensure that the data is stored and is accessible, and we'll work with other groups to ensure we're linked up and aligned. Now, I won't touch on budget because that's clearly something that's under negotiation and will be dependent on reviews and a whole bunch of things. But I do want to point out that I think there's a really strong opportunity for leveraging. And that's been done really successfully in the past by a number of the previous SCAR research programs, to the level of hundreds of millions of dollars through resource in kind and co-funding. And I expect that to be part of the way we operate. We don't have a big budget, but we can coordinate, facilitate, put partnerships and international research consortia together. And finally, given the societal relevance of this, we think it will be attractive to philanthropic funding, and we're hoping and looking to work with SCAR, XCOM and other groups as appropriate to perhaps carve out an exciting project that might be of interest to philanthropic funders. So I'll wrap up with that, and apologies about the issues at my end. I was going to do a video, but went with this. But really, we just want to finish up by, on behalf of Florence and I, just acknowledging, how this process has gone and how positive it has been, and how excited we are about the potential of the Instant program, and we'll take some questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim and Florence, for putting that together. It's a pretty enormous program. Now, we don't have a lot of time for questions now, but we will spill over into the discussion forum at the end. Just to remind folks, when you're asking your questions, if you could, don't send them on the Zoom chat, but send the questions in the on-air live Q&A function for the SCAR meeting, because the online ones won't find us to be able to be asked. So the Zoom ones, sorry. Okay, so quick, well, maybe not a quick question, but one for you and Florence, Tim, is there's a question that I'll take the chair's prerogative and summarise it slightly. A question about the linkage to the life sciences. So is it that Instant will want input from some of the life science research and programs, or is it that the Instant program will give output that it's important to the life sciences, or both? Do you want to comment on that? Maybe I'll I'll pass it to you, Tim, and if you want to pass it to Florence.
Sure. Yeah, this has been something we've been really aware of, and it's a great question, so thank you for it. There is a little bit of life sciences in there. Largely, it's pretty much around genomics and the role that genomics could play in reconstructing, past configurations of the ice sheet and that sort of thing. But we really did want to develop that further. And the short answer is yes, I think there is opportunity to do that. As Alex and others have said, we're developing this, and there will be a program establishment workshop to continue those discussions. And I think it's a worry that we're still a bit compartmentalized within SCAR, that the new strategic research programs are either one or the other. But having said that, and perhaps Tom will emphasize this, there are some very strong linkages between Instant and ICON and the new Ant-CLIM Now program.
Do you want to add anything, Florence?
As Tim said, we since the beginning plan to, of course, allow for linkages also for life sciences. And I think there will be plenty of occasions during this establishment workshop, because as we saw, I mean, this program is very huge. So at that point, it's difficult to exclude somebody, but we didn't have the occasion when we draft the program to really make those linkage, but it doesn't mean that we will not include them in the establishment workshop.
Thanks, Florence. And maybe one quick one for you from the question feed. Do you see significant difference in how the ice sheet behaves in different parts of Antarctica?
Okay. Well, yes, there are huge differences because part of Antarctica has the ice sheet grounded on a bed that is below sea level, and part of Antarctica is grounded on the bed that is above sea level. So there are huge difference in the ice flow and the type of ice flow actually regime that can be definitely observed by satellite observations. And so, yeah, the east is very different. Part of the east are also based on bedrock below sea level. So we definitely observed strong differences.
Thank you for that. Now we better move on, and more questions at the end for you guys. But now we're going to hear from the third program we're going to hear about is Ant-CLIM Now, near-term variability and prediction of the Antarctic climate system. And the co-leaders of Ant-CLIM Now are Tom Bracegirdle and Ilana Weiner. So Tom is an atmospheric and climate scientist at the British Antarctic Survey. He has research interests in polar meteorology and climate, large-scale atmospheric circulation, and troposphere-stratosphere interactions. Tom has co-led the Ant-CLIM 21, Antarctic Climate Change in the 21st Century, scientific research program for SCAR. Ilana is a professor at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. She's a physical oceanographer who's interested in representation of Southern Ocean processes, including sea ice processes in global climate models. And Ilana is currently a vice president of the Scientific Committee on Oceanic Research. But the presentation this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are, is going to be led by Tom. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Gary, for the introduction, and thanks to the organisers for giving us the opportunity to present these future SRPs and carry on with some online participation. It's really good to have the opportunity. So yeah, so Ant-CLIM Now is focused on near-term variability and prediction of the Antarctic climate system. And as Gary said, a co-chief officer is Ilana Weiner, and she's been contributing a lot along with everyone else. This is a team effort, and you'll hear more about the rest of the team later in the presentation. And I would also like to acknowledge David Bromwich, who has now stepped aside but was very instrumental in the early stages of Ant-CLIM Now and advising us through his experience through a large part of the program planning group. A very important place to start is in terms of defining what we mean by near-term climate variability and prediction. And so this space in prediction sits between weather forecasts, which occur on timescales of days, weeks, and months, and then the longer term century timescale predictions or projections that stretch further into the future. And the near term period between about 1 year and about 30 years represents quite a specific scientific problem, in that we have some aspects of variability in the climate system that could be predictable on those timescales, and we have the slow background forcing from greenhouse gases and other climate forcers. So we have this combination of internal variability of the climate system and external forcings competing, well, not competing, but coming together to drive changes in this near-term period. And this is a major strategic priority for the World Climate Research Programme as well. So bringing together a programme like this links in with a new strategic plan that's being developed by the World Climate Research Programme. And also these near-term predictions are key, not just scientifically, but in terms of the wider planning and operations and infrastructure for Antarctica and other regions. There are also global climate impacts of what's happening now in Antarctica. As many of you know, processes in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica are influencing rates of global warming historically and in the current times. A lot of the heat gain historically has occurred in the Southern Ocean, and so it's very key to regulating not just regional change around Antarctica, but global patterns of change. There are also potential global ecological impacts on these decadal timescales, regional and far-reaching effects in terms of biogeochemistry, biodiversity, and food security. So I've already touched on some of these reasons for proposing such a programme at the moment. And here's a broader list. The latest version of the World Climate Research Programme, as we just heard, is focusing on the near-term prediction problem. And there's a large amount of data just being released as part of the CMIP6 project, which is the climate modelling effort being developed and will feed into the currently be prepared IPCC AR6. New reconstructions from longer-term climate proxies are important for improving knowledge about decadal variability of the Antarctic climate system. And there are recent advances in both observations and modelling that are helping to predict annual to decadal, multi-decadal timescales of variability in Antarctica. And I'll touch on some of those in a moment. A key scientific challenge, which is particularly evident in Antarctica, is that short-term regional change can temporarily differ from the global picture. And this is quite nicely illustrated by these plots here produced by Stenny et al. In 2017, showing reconstructions of temperature change over the last 200 or so years in different regions around Antarctica, from the Weddell Sea coast around different parts of Antarctica. And you can see there that in many regions there's an overall, we can start to see maybe an overall warming, but there are multi-decadal periods of of warming and cooling. And this is represented with the fact that there are these multi-decadal changes around Antarctica that could provide some predictability on this near-term timescale. Some of this could come from links to the tropics. Tropical modes of variability, such as El Nino and La Nina, are known to be key drivers of variability at southern high latitudes. And there are many important questions that remain, for example, relating to the comparative roles of different tropical modes influencing Antarctica. But as well as tropical variability, a very active area of research at the moment is looking at variations within the Southern Ocean that can provide potential decadal predictability in relation to, for example, to sea ice increases. This is one example of a paper, Zhang et al. In 2017. And on the plots on the left-hand side, we can see hindcasts. So these are decadal predictions in the time frame of 2 to 7 years into the future, showing general sea ice increases when their model is initialized in a phase that's of the Southern Ocean variability that matches observations, and then sea ice observations for the same period. And you can start to see that there's an indication of predictability on these shorter timescales. A very key issue, unfortunately, is that we really need very good observations with which to initialize these models. And so when we don't have good initialization of these models, it's very hard to generate these reliable predictions. So observations are absolutely key. So in terms of addressing some of these questions, Ant-CLIM Now has been structured in a way to bring together a number of themes, some of which are scientific, and others are in terms of developing communication results to stakeholders. So we have not just the overarching goal to improve near-term predictions of the Antarctic climate system, but also linking up with other SCAR groups, so Instant and Ant-ICON that we heard of. And then also more broadly as well, we've got broader SCAR activities as well, and wider linkages and synergies outside SCAR. So in terms of looking at routes to progress within Ant-CLIM Now, in terms of the science, there's much more to be done in terms of improving knowledge of mechanisms for decadal climate variability, as we've just seen. With climate modeling, there are many new data sets that need to be utilized. There's actually probably a lot more being done than can be assessed by the current scientific effort that's available, and we really need to try and facilitate and bring together groups and funding and effort to try and attack these problems. And advances include decadal prediction systems, but also high-resolution atmosphere ocean modeling. We need to link complex real-world observations to low-resolution climate modeling, and this could, for example, maybe utilize advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence statistical approaches, and utilizing and developing diverse data sets ranging from longer-term ice core records to modern satellite retrievals. Interdisciplinary collaboration will be very key, and we will link closely to Ant-ICON and Instant, both scientifically and in terms of communicating to the wider community of Antarctic stakeholders. So in terms of the team, we've already heard about co-chief officers, myself and Alana Weiner, but we have a scientific steering committee now set up to address the 5 themes. And it's really exciting to see a really international mix of world-leading experts in many different areas and representations on IPCC report writing for CMIP 6. So it's really shaping up to be a very exciting steering committee. And I mustn't forget that everyone across the program planning group, all 44 members who have contributed over the last 2 years to really help develop the proposal. And if you're interested in joining, please do contact us. So either myself or Alana, we'd love to hear from you, and we're very open to involving people in the program. In terms of deliverables and outcomes, ultimately, it would be wonderful if we could develop a diverse international community of scientists to facilitate scientific advances in near-term climate change estimates for Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. Improved communication between scientists and strong coordination with Ant-ICON and Instant. Linking beyond scientists to environmental and logistics and management groups, for example, and tourism and fisheries. We will hold a number of international workshops to address specific themes, but also smaller meetings to maintain communications across other SRPs and groups.
2 minutes.
And in terms of capacity, oh yeah, 2 minutes did you say?
Yes.
Thank you. In terms of capacity building, we will actually look to, we already have early career researchers on the scientific steering committee, but it will be important to reach out, and we're hoping to reach out to groups such as APEX to provide candidates for a specific early career representative on the steering committee. So that's something that we're hoping to do or planning to do. And also provide opportunities for researchers from emerging Antarctic nations. So to summarize, Ant-CLIM Now would address a major gap actually in the scientific scope of current SRPs, this near-term prediction period. It would be focused on policy relevant, cutting edge science of both global and regional importance. And it really has been clear that there is a strong appetite in the international community for such a program. And in fact, many of the core potential members are actually new to SCAR. So it's brought in quite a few researchers who maybe didn't have a home in the current SRP setup to maybe be involved in future within SCAR. So that's really heartening to see. And I'll leave it there and take any questions. Thanks very much for listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom, for that great presentation. And yeah, it is exciting to see us starting to look at some of these questions about why we see what we see now compared to some of the longer term predictions. So that's very exciting. Now, I'm just looking through the questions. There's I don't have anything specific for Ant-CLIM Now yet, but as it comes in, we'll ask it. But there's a general question that's come up a lot from folks, which I'll just address quickly, and then we'll get into the discussion and question and answer back to all of the program leads here. That is, people are asking how to get involved in an SRP, and I know that that everyone's touched on how to get in touch with the different leaders, but just to remind folks, if you go to the SCAR webpage, and you click on the science tab of the SCAR web page, there's a drop-down menu, and the bottom one is the link to the program planning groups. So you can simply get through to a lot of this information through the SCAR web page, including the contact details of the leaders who've all said in their presentations today that they welcome any questions and emails from people who want to get involved. So that should address that question. Okay, so this is a question now, which what I'll do, because we're in the forum, is maybe I'll ask the question and then and pass it backwards and forwards to the different program planning groups. So this question is about data. The question is, are there specific plans or ideas on how to form robust international frameworks for supporting data acquisition and long-term networks? And the question also refers to funding, but if I pass that to you first, Tom, and then I'll pass it on to the others. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I just saw some messages there about interference. Can you hear me okay? It's okay. Yeah, well, so we don't have any specific plans in the proposal for specific new observational efforts, but it is a major part of our proposal. So one of the things that we are planning to do is bring together experts from a range of backgrounds and try to think about what the ideal observational network would be for Antarctica, and then look at how close we could get to that in terms of, this is from a climate and atmospheric and oceanography perspective, and what would be needed in terms of near-term prediction. So you can look at which parts of for example, for decadal prediction, one could look at which parts of the Southern Ocean might require the most monitoring to get the best benefit. But we don't have any hard and fast specific plans at this point.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I'll pass it to Alex. Do you want to address that from an ICON perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Gary, and thanks, Tom and Tim, for your presentations as well. And I think it's a really good question. I think it does underpin a lot of the objectives across all three of the proposed SRPs. What we did do in Ant-ICON is at a quite a high level identify that there were already a couple of well-established or developing frameworks in place, either through, for example, SUS, and I noticed Louise has come in on the chat there to sort of reinforce that SUS is really interested in working with the SRPs. And look, the Southern Ocean Observing System is a really important established framework that is acquiring data that has relevance across all three of the SRPs. If we think a little bit more about what's sort of coming up, ANTOS, the Antarctic Nearshore and Terrestrial Observing System, is another SCAR affiliated group with a desire and aspiration to set up a continent-wide observing system across the terrestrial and nearshore networks. So I think at quite a high level, tapping into some of these existing or developing frameworks and making sure that we have close links, we take advantage of synergies, is a really good starting point. Then, of course, we have the next level down where there are more specific monitoring infrastructure or desires in place, and then that's sort of to be sort of approached on a bit more of a case-by-case basis, and that's where again some of the funding opportunities and collaborations could be explored in a bit more detail. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex, and I'll pass it to Tim, and then I'll open it up to the others if they want to comment. Do you want to comment from an instant perspective, Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, I agree, Alex. This is something that transcends all the programs, and it's always been a challenge, and it was, identified in the roadmap process as well. And usually these sort of efforts to acquire data from Antarctica, they require large resources and consortia and cooperation between programs. And I think there are some really some good examples from the past. Certainly when it comes to acquiring airborne radar geophysics, the Thwaites, NSF, NERC, SEUS, Andril, the ocean drilling program, which leveraged, a drilling platform worth $100 million US, and that was really largely done under pace. So, even although we have very small budgets, I think we can be quite influential in putting these together. I mean, one of the things that I find hard to get my head around is Earth observations. It's very expensive stuff, but really critical, and making connections with that community, with the satellite community, I think is key as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I don't know if Metja or Florence want to add to that. No.
Yes.
Metja?
And I would also like to highlight that one of the ideas is to run or develop workshops where we can look for or address specific questions between these programs. So that will be a place to also to keep developing these ideas.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got a question here. This is one that's come in on Ant-CLIM Now, Tom. A question about the relevance or the potential linkage between CAMLR and what you're proposing with Ant-CLIM Now. Would you like to comment on that? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying that we have on our steering committee a representative from who's a member of CAMLR, so Rachel Kavanagh. So she will probably be much better able to answer this question than I can. But what I would say is that in terms of the near term, that regional information on how sea ice might change over the next decade in specific regions of Antarctica, I can imagine would be one example of relevance to maybe planning or other aspects of CAMLR. I suppose so that's one example. I think this near term period is, and actually I suppose another example is that it's not just near-term prediction that Ant-CLIM Now is going to look at. So it's another important thing is that we're looking at quantifying variability of the Antarctic system. So if there are regions that have been observed, say, in the last 20 years to exist in a certain climate state, one of the things that we'll be able to do is to look at whether that's representative of the longer term, or whether actually it could have been sampling a period of time that wasn't representative, and that region could experience extremes in the future that they maybe hadn't expected, based on maybe a data set that was too short. But there are ways that you can look at that in a climate model perspective. There are toolkits available that could be applied and potentially relevant to CAMLR and other organizations.
Thanks for that, Tom. There's a question here that I've got from the instant presentation. Maybe I'll send this one your way, Florence, to begin with, and then Tim may want to comment. The question is, are you evaluating what is the contribution to sea level rise by warming in intermediate layer waters, for example, in the circumpolar deep water, and how much is it by glaciers melting?
So yeah, the answer is yes, and we have done it for the past. And we are doing, Ant-CLIM Now has been doing it for present and future. So yes, of course, warming the intermediate water masses that directly access the grounding line of Antarctic ice sheet is one of the major feedbacks that are under consideration right now, because it's not only local, it also has a global impact that then feedbacks again on Antarctica. So it has a huge impact. Actually, it has been shown for both the past interglacials and in the future that adding some fresh water even further stratifies oceans and advects the heat directly to Antarctica. So it just amplifies our projections for every scenarios under consideration. So yes, we do, and we will even furthermore explore this aspect actually.
Thank you, Florence. You want to add anything, Tim?
No, that was great. Thanks, Florence.
Okay, so a couple of questions here that we'll do the rounds on. And I'll throw this maybe to Alex and Mecha first. Are the new SRPs planning on working together on a joint project as well? I know it's early days, but it's still a good question to see where the potential linkages might be developed.
The short answer is yes, Gary, and to the person that asked that question. We have, in the lead up to the finalisation of the proposals, been working together quite closely to develop ideas around where the three groups can collaborate. We think the sum of these three groups is much greater than the parts, if you like, that together we can actually produce some really important outputs across a whole range of disciplines. And I think that's the key here. While each of the SRPs has got a focus on a certain and quite particular set of disciplines, together these disciplines can combine very well. And so probably the best way, and the most tangible way that we've got at this point in time around this question, is that we have workshops already planned where the SRPs will get together, identify areas where those collaborations can be progressed, and then start to progress them. And so the short answer is yes, and that there are plans afoot to make sure that we take advantage of these sorts of collaborations.
Do you want to add anything, Mecha, before I pass it to Tim? No, all good. Tim or Florence? Tim, do you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, well, I mean, just back up what Alex said. We've talked about this. Definitely, that's the aspiration, and it should be achievable, given that there are some really obvious linkages between, the sort of projections and things we're thinking about with ice sheets melting, freshwater going into the ocean, and sea level rise, and the near-term climate predictability that Tom's looking at. I'm sure we'll come up with an exciting program. I just want to reflect on that question about why isn't there more life sciences in these new SRPs. And I really do think there is a niche for a large ocean ecosystems type program looking at the response of climate change. And that is something that Instant and Ant-CLIM Now would be, really geared up to work closely with.
Thanks, Tim. Mecha.
Sorry, I will add to what you say and what Alex mentioned too, that in this, I think that our idea is that in these workshops where we can work all together, of these new programs together, we will also include these policymakers, that with this, where we will learn about the specific questions that they need to be addressed, and so we can see how we can inform with the science that we can deliver. And yeah, I wanted to add that.
Thanks, Mecha. Anything to add from you, Tom?
Well, actually, it's all been covered. Thanks. Yeah.
Great. There's another question here that's a good one, which is how can the 3 proposed SRPs play a role in training up a new generation of researchers to engage with the policymakers? How about I kick that to you first, Tim? You blinked.
Maybe I smiled or something, or gritted my teeth. Thanks, Gary. Look, this was a question that came through to Valerie Masson-Delmotte last night for her plenary, and I thought she answered it really well. And I think a number of things have been suggested today. I think as scientists and within SCAR, and I know from my colleagues, we're all slightly nervous about the policy science interface. And, people like Alex and his work with the treaty system, he's much more comfortable. But I think, we need to develop our young scientists as leaders, both within these programs and they get the opportunity for the international exposure and collaboration, but also find pathways for them to get involved in the IPCC, to get involved in Antarctic Environment Portal or the ACE program, or just talking with stakeholders and end users. And as Alex was saying, find ways they can get maybe internships or scholarships to attend an Antarctic Treaty System meeting. We really need to facilitate that and key to that is also being interdisciplinary and working with social scientists. And so we're not so afraid to go to the interface with policy.
No, that's a great answer, Tim. I think, yeah, it's actually important that we all take some time to go to some of these interface meetings and learn about how others are thinking of and approaching what we do as researchers, rather than just talking to other researchers. I might throw this now to you, Metja, to comment as well, because I know you're Kamala rep and the SCORV, you're involved in a number of these policy interfaces. So do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think that I used to be a Camera Scholarship recipient, and I think that to participate in these meetings, particularly in these meetings like Camera or CEP, give us a invaluable. It's like there is no way to experience that without going. This is a very, very good opportunity. So to participate in these meetings, to have a clear idea of how our science can help supporting some policies. So I think that, as Alex mentioned earlier, we are going to support early career researchers to be part of these meetings, and also to be part of the workshops, and also to be part of the program in different positions, to learn how to gain experience or how to interact, not only to do science, but how to interact in these meetings. But as we say, there is room for everyone in the program. We are going to do pure science, and also we would like to help or to provide, to inform science to policy, for policymakers.
Thanks, Metja. And I wonder if you would like to add a few comments, Florence, from Italy and Europe, because we've got listeners from right around the globe. It'd be interesting to have your thoughts from a European perspective as well.
Well, I can perhaps refer about the personal experience I had for the last IPCC report on the special report on the ocean and the cryosphere. So the APEX, Early Career Scientist Association, actually, they really raised a kind of team of early career scientists to review the reports, actually, each chapters of the report, and many of us took part to this, and it was very, very stimulating and very collaborative work. And I think we learned a lot, because IPCC provides a lot of training for the new reviewers, new editors, new authors. So a lot of concepts that are also explained during the 2 or 3 training workshops that the early career had to follow, actually, before formally start the reviewing process. And I think there will be more and more occasions like that to directly take part and engage directly with the writing from early career scientist point of view. So I definitely encourage all the early career to take part of this kind of process, because this is a way to learn how to definitely engage with policy as well. I mean, that's another way.
Okay, that's great. We're pretty much at the end of our time. I think that was a fantastic note to end on, really, which is what quite a few of these program planning groups are looking at, is how do we find our voice as scientists and researchers beyond just the discussion forums about science and research, and how do we make sure we really deliver some impact, some change, and some help for policymakers in this. And I think the commentary there is that actually we have to be willing to step out of our comfort zone, and we have to be willing to join these other forums and actually share the science and research perspective. So a really important point coming out there. So thank you very much for the presentations, excellent presentations, and a good set of questions and discussion. I know there are some more questions that are still pending. So for those who still have questions, remember there's the meeting hub on the on-air portal where people can connect and continue networking. So there's another forum there to do that. And just again to remind folks, go to the SCAR webpage, click on the science link and down to the program planning groups, and you can learn a lot more about these and how to contact people and find out more. So, and just before I close the session, I do want to remind you the next SCAR session, Discovering Antarctica's Climate Secrets by Nerali Aram, is in 8.5 hours. That's at 07:30 UTC for those who are tuning in for that. And if you haven't yet had a look through the program, do so on the web page where you've registered, and get ahead of when these different presentations are going to be, because they're moving around in time to try and capture people around the world. And if you missed part of this, remember it's going to be rescreened, so that'll be in the program as well when there's a replay of some of these presentations for those who might have come in late and missed part of it. And if you want to have another look and find out who those contact people are. So thank you very much for attending, and I wish you all well, keep safe in this environment, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you very much again to all our speakers.